I'm Janie Becker, and I'm an extension agent here in Rutherford County, and we're going to talk about cover crops. This is something that I've had a passion for several years, but never got to do much on a large scale. And last year I decided to start some demonstrations so that we could teach everyone, show them what they look like. We talk about cover crops. You might hear it in passing when you talk about organic soil amendments and ways to manage your property more naturally. But really seeing it and seeing what these crops look like, I thought would be something valuable to citizens and gardeners. And whether you're a small gardener working in raised beds, in the ground, if you're a production farmer working in row crops, or even if you manage forages with livestock, all of these things can apply. Cover crops can be used in all of these situations. So we do have some demonstration plots. You have to drive by them to get to the market. They were really pretty a few weeks ago, and then we killed them so that we rolled them so that we could plant some new warm season cover crops. They had our winter planting with cool season crops, and then they were all going to seed. We will have a very rich seed bank because we let them go a little too far. But that's part of the learning experience and to show people what they look like. So we have them labeled. You can see what's in those plantings. And if anyone is interested to brave the sun afterward, we can go out there and see how things are coming along. It has been very dry, and I decided to take a natural approach, and I've been not irrigating much since I planted this warm season. So results are mixed right now, we'll just say that. The geese have done a number on some of my seeds as well. They like what I've planted. So let's get started with what a cover crop is. So in its most basic, it's a living ground cover. Something that you put on bare soil to keep it from being bare. And if you plant, it's a living ground cover. There's many attributes of cover crops, and they can be opposite from each other. They can be planted in the cool season. They can be in the warm season. You can plant them alone or mixed with a whole different other cover crop species. You can even plant cover crops with your cash crop. Some farmers will have their rows of, say, broccoli or peas or whatever, and their aisles where they would normally be walking through the mud and slop and trying to keep the weeds out. They'll plant a cover crop instead, and they then have control over what the plant is in the aisle, and they're not spending a lot of time and effort trying to keep those weeds from competing with their crop. They can pick something that is easy to manage. Maybe they pick something that's for low growth, so they can walk through it and they're not wading through high weeds. Some people will even plant the cover crop with the cash crop. Does everyone know what I mean when I say cash crop? We think of that as production agriculture in a lot of ways. Cash crop is something that you intend to harvest for a use for humans. It could be for home use or for production in a sense. But some people will actually put for late season crop of, say, cabbage or broccoli or cauliflower. They'll raise those transplants for broccoli transplants, and they'll plant them in maybe early August and plant them according to their spacings. And then after those transplants get a hold in the ground, give them about 3 or 4 weeks, they'll overseed with a crimson clover, something that will a cover crop that will overwinter. It's a legume, so it fixes nitrogen and adds nitrogen and brings it from the soil and puts it into the soil pulls it from the air and puts it into the soil so that the cash crop can use it. And then it prevents weeds from growing up amongst the broccoli and shading them out. And then once the broccoli is all harvested by the end of the fall, then you've already got your cover crop sowed. You're not waiting to get that cash crop out of the ground before you can sow a cover crop for the winter. So some of them do fix nitrogen. Legumes, anything that's in the bean and pea family, is termed a legume, and they do fix nitrogen. They pull it from the atmosphere, and there's soil microbes, bacteria that help those legumes transpose is not the right word, but they help to not transfix. They help change it into a form that plants can use it. I'm sorry, the word is not coming to me. So that's legumes. Does anyone know what trapping nitrogen, how that could be beneficial? So say in the summer you have a legume crop. Maybe it's cowpeas or beans or soybeans. You have a lot of nitrogen potentially in that soil. And if you then harvest that crop at the end of the summer, you could lose a lot of nitrogen before you plant your next crop in the spring. You could lose it through soil leaching. You could lose some of it just from runoff, stuff that would go into sheet erosion in the rain. If you plant a cover crop that's going to use a lot of that nitrogen, and then leave that cover crop in the ground, at that spot, the nitrogen's not going anywhere for the most part. It's a little bit will volatilize, but most of it's going to stay there and still be there in the spring in that decomposing form of that cover crop. So a trap crop can be really handy to keep those nutrients on site. They need to be fast growing so that they do compete with weeds. In the same sense, they need to be dense and create a lot of biomass, and they can add a lot of organic matter to your soil and add to the tilth and fluff of the soil, called sponginess sometimes. Some are very deep-rooted, and they can help to break up hard, compacted soils. We don't really have a lot of hard pan in this area, something that you see a little more out west, and it's a layer of soil below the topsoil and below the next horizon that just can't be penetrated by roots. But cover crops can be used to break up hard pan. They can be used to break up clay soils that are really dense and have no air space, no pore space for water. Same note, they can be big rooted. You've heard of daikon radishes. Some of y'all have been here for our cooking classes, and we talked about daikon radishes. These big, long, white radishes that can really break into deep layers of the soil and create big holes for water and air to get into. They can be used for grazing if they're timed appropriately. They can attract pollinators. Some of the mustards and plants like buckwheat and some of your legumes can be excellent for pollinators all throughout the season, spring through fall. And they can be used to reduce pest and disease issues in a allelopathic sense. So as if that weren't enough, I wanted to show you that they can be all of those different things. It doesn't mean that one cover crop will solve all those problems for you or have all those attributes. But these are some of the aspects we're going to talk about more in depth. Protecting soil from erosion, from losing your soil, from losing your nutrients that you've worked hard to accumulate. To enhance soil structure, that's one of the biggest reasons that we use cover crops is to add organic matter to the soil. And there's a couple of types of organic matter that we'd be adding. One is there's three types: the living roots that will be in the soil. The living roots that are plunging into the soil, making channels, exchanging nutrients with soil microbes. That means bacteria, fungi, and all kinds of little critters. There's recently dead organic matter. If you use these in a green manure sense, where you, instead of just killing the crop and laying it down as a mulch, you actually turn it into the soil, that's one method. That's recently dead organic matter that's feeding all those microbes as well. And you have a third type that's very, very dead, and it's actually a soluble organic matter. And that's one thing that we're actually measuring in these soils in our demonstration gardens. And that organic matter it's not something you can see. It doesn't look like grass, it doesn't look like fruit, but it is still a very important binding portion of the soil, and it still feeds all those microbes, kind of a glue that holds a lot of soil structure together. So increasing nutrient potential in the soil kind of goes on with number one. Storing nutrients for later use is in the trap crop example. For pest control, when you think of pests, what do you think of? Moles, bugs, weeds. A pest can be anything that you don't want in your environment. And that might be disease, it might be weeds, it might be an animal of some sort, or a microorganism. All of those are pests. And they can be used for a variety of different pest control applications. Increase the biological activity in soil, and of course habitat for beneficials and insects. For those of you who saw the slides, they can also just be beautiful. They can be a really nice addition to your garden. Most importantly, they can protect your investment that you've already put in. If you're trying to build soil and trying to add organic matter and trying to prepare as rich an environment as you can for the plants, your cash crops, you want to do everything you can to preserve that. So some of the ways that cover crops got most well known, and we're still working on getting them more and more into use, was from the Dust Bowl in the late 20s and early 30s of the last century. The Dust Bowl, it's a very complicated story, but essentially we over-farmed. There was a natural drought, and then farming actually created, the over-farming actually created some weather conditions of their own, and there was nothing to hold the soil in place. And it just picked up and moved. And the more it did, the less likely it was to get a crop on the ground. A much longer story than that. These sorts of dust storms were all too common for about a 7 to 8 year period in the Midwest. And we lost a lot of our soil. There was soil in the Dust Bowl down in Europe in some of the big storms. You would blanket. There was a day when they said in New York City it was just completely gray. From Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma. So cover crops, there's a lot of energy in wind, there's a lot of energy in water, and cover crops help dissipate that energy. So when they provide a barrier between the soil and those natural elements and keep those soils in place. The roots themselves, we just see roots as being these little threads of material, but they have millions of tinier hairs that we can't see that are also holding, tiny Velcro, holding all those soil particles together. Roots can help hold those things in place. Whenever we grow roots in an area that would otherwise be fallow, we're creating channels for increased infiltration. So that sheet, when we talk about sheet runoff, it's not making gullies, it's not going straight to the creek, but it's just really sheeting water that can take away a lot of soil. It's something that this is a case that sheet erosion, well, it doesn't show up on here, does it? Sheet erosion turned into making all these rivulets. Sheet erosion is kind of in disguise. You don't notice that damage as much. You don't notice the loss of soil and the loss of nutrients from sheet erosion. But if you create a lot of channels, if you make the soil more porous, the water will infiltrate and not run off. Trap crops. This right here, it's hard to imagine. We see things like this in our fields here in Tennessee. West Tennessee is even worse because they have sandier soil. If you start to quantify the tons of soil lost in a major rain event, you start to quantify the amount of water that fell that could have soaked into the soil but ran off in a muddy stream, it really starts to be overwhelming. So everything we can do makes a big difference. In soil structure, I have 3 pictures here. These are all from this spring, and when we took a look at our cover crops back in May, we put these cover crops in mainly in September of last year, and when we did that, it was hard to get a spade at more than 3 inches in the ground. We really chipped at it, and we got a tamp bar, and we're really trying to get into the 6-inch layer or so, but it was hard as a rock and more like concrete. There was almost no root. The only thing that was growing in there was Bermuda. There was a little bit of medic, just some weeds, some yard weeds. We couldn't find roots that we could detect below 3 inches. So it's about like that. After 1 season of cover cropping, and this is cereal rye in this picture right here, there were roots far below 8 inches in this picture that we could see. They were breaking up that soil, and this was not hard to get into after 1 season. So imagine how we might look in 5 years after we've had many years of this material breaking up. You can see how much richer the soil is too. This is a photo that I especially like because this came from this area about right here, about 4 or 5 inches down. This right here is held in my hand. It's a bundle. Think of it as a hairball or something about that big. that all of these roots are holding this massive soil together. There's no way I could have separated all the soil and roots. It was just bound in a very tight clump. Not tight clump, it was a spongy, loose clump. It was really pretty amazing.
That's rye.
This was rye right here. Rye has a lot of cereal grains have especially, we'll talk a little bit about details of different cover crops, but I kind of skim over some of that just to give you the concepts. This is cereal rye right here. This is a mixture up here of wheat and hairy vetch. I took this photo to show, this is while the cover crop is still in the ground, and it doesn't show up quite as well as I'd hoped, but to show you the amount of organic matter, this is before we even harvested. There's a good 2-inch layer of organic matter just from all the shedding of leaves and flowers and little bits of stem just over the course of one season. Before we took off a mound of material that was bigger than me in a 10 by 10 pot. So just wanted to show you all that duff and detritus. So the air and water, space and soil that cover crops create. If you weren't growing something in your garden over the course of the winter, it would just be a flat exposed area for weed seeds to germinate. When rainwater falls, believe it or not, it has quite a force on compaction. That energy over the course of months can really do a lot to squish out all the airspace and make your soils harder and less porous. Talked about the organic matter in soil and improving tilth. Tilth is kind of an intangible word. It's hard to describe, but it's a feel of soil. It's a lighter soil, a less dense soil, something that would literally weigh less, the same volume than a really dense soil. It's a fluffy soil. And that sponginess, that's how I like to think of things like this image over here. Compaction. After we have a construction site, or a constructed residential area, and all those trucks have been in and out, making everything perfectly uniform, that's a lot of weight that's been on that soil. A lot of our homeowners could be using some of these methods of cover crops, even if they're not having a garden area, just to plant something that has a lot of material and break up some of those soils to reduce that compaction. When you have used cover crops in an area a lot, you think about a row crop field that has a lot of tractor activity with sprayers and harvesters and combines and balers and whatever it might be. Using cover crops can help make those soils a lot more resilient so they can tolerate some of that because they are spongy and they do have some air and they do have some bounce to them. So more resiliency is another way to say. And feel free to ask any questions along the way. I'll do my best to. So someone said, I was at a presentation a couple of years ago, and she was talking about soil health and soil structure and nutrients and how to get the different minerals onto your soil, or onto your farms as a commercial setting. And there was a very good-intentioned farmer in the back. He was young, and he was saying, "I don't want to apply anything to my fields. I don't want to buy any fertilizers. I want to do it all on site. I don't want to get rock phosphate. I don't care if it's organic. I don't care if it's chemically made." And she had a very good point. She said, "You're in the business of selling nutrients and water in the form of produce from your farm. Unless you sell it to your consumer. Unless you then get your consumer's waste back onto your farm and compost it, you're going to have to add some things to your soil." So that was a good point about nutrient cycling. It always has to come from somewhere, whether it's boron or manganese or something we use even in small supply. We've got to think about that. But cover crops they don't create nutrients. Nutrients aren't created. We have to obtain them somewhere, but we can make them more available to plants. Just because we may have, if you get a soil test, you get your soil tested and you get a recommendation back, and it shows that you have high phosphorus levels or high potassium levels. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're in a form that your plants can use them. It doesn't mean that they're accessible to the plants. So creating a more active soil structure with your microorganisms that are breaking down some of those components and turning them into available forms by adding some of the actual glue, the this in-between area in the rhizosphere, which is an area around roots where microorganisms are found in more plentiful supply. They produce this fungi and some types of fungi and plants create a symbiotic relationship where it's called mycorrhizae, and they will actually work together to create, the plant will give the fungi carbohydrates that it gets from photosynthesis from the sun. And then in turn, the fungus, who has a very, very broad spread compared to that plant's root system, will move some of those nutrients into the area where the roots can pick them up. And in the process, they create this, mycorrhizae create this compound called glomalin. And glomalin is, we've got it called soil lume. And a lot of that interchange of nutrients happens in this rhizosphere where the mycorrhizae are most active with the plant. A lot of that exchange happens in that soil bloom that also binds soil. So I hope you get the visual of what I'm seeing, but it's really pretty amazing. So you can get mine a lot of nutrients from the soil. Trap nutrients that would otherwise leak out. You can use some cover crops. It's a little counterintuitive. You might use a cover crop that has high nitrogen needs, so that it pulls it out of the soil and binds it up, like I described earlier. It keeps it from flowing off. And then turn that back into the soil, and as it slowly breaks down, you will then be re-releasing that nitrogen for your following crops that need nitrogen as well. Fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere, I talked about that a little bit. Sometimes you will plant a legume with a non-legume so that you get benefits from both worlds. Maybe your legume takes a little while to establish, and so it doesn't out-compete the weeds as much. So you'll plant the legume with a non-legume that has a much faster growth rate. And it gives it time for that legume to get stronger, to start fixing nitrogen, but you still smother the weeds in your cover crop area.
Excuse me, Jim.
Yes.
Are you saying lagoon?
Legume.
Okay.
This word right here, that's
okay.
in the bean or pea family. So for cover crops, common legumes would be your clovers, vetch, cowpeas, field peas. There's a couple winter peas. They're also called field peas sometimes. We've got one that I'm trialing right now that I've never handled before, called sun hemp, which is a neat legume because a lot of legumes are, if you've ever grown peas in the garden or beans, they're kind of spindly and kind of frail, puny plants. They can beef up. But sun hemp produces a ton of biomass, a ton of organic matter. It kind of gets woody almost, and a whole lot of stems and leaves and a lot of structure to it. So you get a little bit of best of both worlds. It fixes nitrogen and it adds a whole lot of material to your soil, and the roots go much deeper than most legumes do.
But it has nothing to do with it.
It's not related to hemp as in a cannabis family at all. It's just called that. Partly because of the form, because it is so big and has a little bit of the same structure in terms of the type of plant. I've heard it can get 5 or 6 feet. We'll find out this year if it germinates. I've got a couple germinated, but I'm about to have to lose my all natural approach to my cover crops this year. It's testing me. But that's part of what demonstration is for, to show that sometimes it'll kick you in the pants trying to get things going, but you try again. So weed suppression. This is very, very important. We use cover crops a lot we think of them more commonly, I would imagine, in the cool season. So we grow a wide variety of crops in the late spring and summer months into the fall. And then once we have frost potential, that's when a lot of people use their cover crops, when they stop doing as much of all the annual weeds that you only see in the spring, that you only notice in the spring. The henbit and the chickweed and the little cress and all these winter annuals, they actually germinate in the fall while things are still relatively mild and it hasn't frozen yet. You don't notice them much because they're very, very tiny. They wait and kind of just pause over the course of the winter. But if you can get a cover crop, if you can put it in early enough, say in September or so, then you can prevent all of those seeds from germinating and not have as much trouble for your spring crop next year. This is hairy vetch. This was hairy vetch mixed with wheat. It's about drowned out the wheat at this point, which is fine by me. Wheat was getting a little weedy. But this was easily 4 feet tall at this point. This was in early May. And you couldn't see to the bottom. In fact, the reason I know how much volume there was, because we started trying to seed through our cover crops for this winter, this summer planting, and the seed wouldn't get below it wouldn't trickle down much more than 6 inches to a foot. So it was just this very, very dense tangled mass. No seed was germinating through this, with it being living. You can also use cover crops you can use them as living mulches in the case of, I talked about the broccoli example, and actually sow them through your cover crop. And then you can also, once you want to kill them, once you want to terminate that cover crop, you can lay them down and they become a true mulch. You lay them down and blanket them around the plants that you're trying to grow. And that allows them to break down more slowly than if you turn them into a fruit. I mentioned this lowering soil temperature. Some of the charts you might look at for germinating different types of seeds will actually mention the different soil temperatures that seeds like to germinate in. And some of our weedy seeds prefer some of those hot soil temperatures where nothing else likes to germinate, and that's where they get a leg up, that's where they get an advantage. By having a thick organic matter layer on the soil, sometimes you can lower that soil temperature and they actually won't germinate as much as well. In addition to blocking the light and blocking the moisture. So does anyone know what allelopathy means? Some crops, some of our cereal grains especially, and also some of our brassicas, that would be mustard, turnips, rape, canola, things in that family, they actually will produce compounds in their roots that will suppress germination. And they're pretty indiscriminate about what they will suppress. So you may not direct seed your garden if you just turned in one of those crops or just laid down one of those crops. But they can be used to suppress some bad weed problems that you have too. A lot of people are familiar with allelopathy in the terms of black walnut. You've heard, don't put your tomatoes close to a black walnut. That black walnut releases a compound that actually gets into the soil in a pretty big area around those roots that helps it to outcompete anything else around it. And then again, ultimately, you're reducing the need for herbicide spray, you're reducing the need for labor to pull those weeds out. This is a great example of weed suppression and timing, and using kind of a tricky cover crop. This is from the Virginia Association of Biological Farming. This fellow sowed his Isles and daikon radish. Daikon radish is that long, deep tap-rooted radish. He sowed this in late summer, early fall, a real dense planting of it. It grows very quickly, has a lot of leaf cover in addition to that big taproot, and completely blanketed the ground so nothing else germinated. He knew it was going to winter kill. It kills in a heart below 25 degrees or so. However, it's also in that brassica family, and it suppressed weed growth long after it had died just by it breaking down and exuding all the components that has an allelopathic effect. So this is the next spring. It's still bare. Didn't have any of those winter annuals germinating, and even some of the spring ones that might pop out. And this was neighboring rows where he had a cover crop, but it didn't have any of the daikon, and he had still had some chickweed, especially chickweed, germinate over the course of the winter in those rows. So I hope that was very pronounced. Is it?
Radish that are often used for track crop also. So even getting bugs.
Yeah, he could be using this as a trap crop for multiple things. He could be using it as a trap crop for insects, attracting some problems. It might be more palatable to some insects, polycomb beetles, flea beetles, than some of his cash crops, and he could only treat these rows and not have to worry about his cash crop as much. You could also trap nutrients in this. Daikon radishes take quite a bit of nitrogen, but then they die in the winter. After they've used all that nitrogen, put it into their cells, they die, and then as they decompose and deteriorate, they're releasing that nitrogen in time for a spring planting. They bound it up so that it didn't run away in November and December, and if you time it just right, then they'll be releasing that in early spring. Then you can reduce your applications of fertilizer.
Janie, what is he kneeling on?
What's he kneeling on?
Yeah. What is that in between
I-
the rows?
I actually don't know. I'd have to go back and look and see what he was. I think that this is a low cereal cover as well for his aisles because he's going to be planting
Right.
these beds. He's also softened his soil by creating those big porous spaces. A lot of deteriorating matter with those radish roots rotting. He has a soft seed bed. It's not real hard and compact. So if he wants to put the transplant in, if he wants to, he might be able to seed directly into it because it's softer, fluffier without cultivation and preserve some of that soil structure.
With the daikon being Nebraska, would there be certain crops that have difficulty following that or difficulty getting them to germinate following that?
You could, because it can actually have some brassicas and some of your cereal grains will have some of that allelopathic effect, and they might have it for a while. There's a lot of studying involved in cover crops because there's nothing that's simple about it. Some people will turn that into the soil and have it deteriorate faster, but you have a much higher spike of those allelopathic compounds and you deteriorate it really quickly. But then it might be over in a month, 5 to 6 weeks. So there's some timing issues. You don't plant immediately after you turn in a cover crop. A lot of people make that mistake and then they don't have the nutrients or they might have some allelopathic thing like this. Some people will, the ones that are most allelopathic, they will, instead of turning them in, they will choose to do the mulch route where they either cut them or some people will spray them with an herbicide, they'll crimp them down and then put transplants into it. And you're going to have a lower level of your allelopathic compounds, but over a much longer period of time. So you'll have to do some research to see what plants are most sensitive and if some plants can tolerate that better than others. And disease control. A lot of your soil, your beneficial soil microorganisms are competitors with some of your pathogenic microorganisms. So creating a very healthy soil structure and a very healthy level of the soil biota, they can have a little war with each other and then you don't have to fight them. So that's a big immune system boost to your plants if you have a lot of really active activity in your soil. Whenever you use a mulch, whether it's living, whether it's something that's been terminated and laying down, you have a big disease boost or disease control boost by limiting soil splash. If anyone's had early blight and or any leaf diseases in their tomatoes or other plants, a lot of that is caused just by getting some of those soil pathogens splashed up onto your leaves. So a lot of your leaf spots and blights and fungal diseases can be prevented by just having a barrier between the actual soil and the plant leaves. And again, the brassicas and cereal grains can have effects against lots of different pathogens. Nematodes are an issue that we have a lot in tomatoes. Some beans will have root knot nematode issues. Nematodes are these little microscopic, think of them as microscopic worms. They're very, very teeny little bitty worms, and they're pathogenic, which means a problematic nematodes as well as beneficial nematodes. And the brassicas and grains can really fight some areas that you've had bad root knot nematode issues in. I thought this was a great graphic. This is showing some of we asked them what kind of critters live in the soil. And it's not just moles, it's not just earthworms. It's mites and beetles and springtails and slugs and those nematodes, good and bad. fly larvae, flatworms, little scorpion, actinomycetes, something kind of like fungi, all sorts of fungi and bacteria. It's a really, really complex food web, and I think we underestimate it a lot just because we can't see it so well.
Did all that stuff come back?
Did all that stuff come back? I've seen, in my cover crop demonstrations, Floyd asked, I'm doing a look, this isn't strictly research, this is mainly demonstration, but I couldn't help but look at a few things over time. And one of them is I'm checking organic matter periodically. So I've got a baseline, I'm going to check it probably once a year or so and see what that dissolved organic matter content is in the soil. In Tennessee, an average is around 2% of your total soil composition is organic, dissolved organic matter. 5% would be a really good target. The higher the better, but sometimes there's a maximum that you can reach because it starts to break itself down if you're not continually adding to it. But I'm also looking at earthworm counts, and that's kind of one of the fun things I'm doing. I'm actually looking at a square foot of soil and testing to see how many earthworms over time are living on those plots. Last August, I did my first earthworm count, and in 3 plots, I got zilch earthworms. I'm not saying that they are never there, but they were not at those times. I did 2 different methods. One, I dug a cubic foot of soil and sifted through it all. I decided that was a real pain in the neck. A cubic soil doesn't sound like all that much until you dig it up and try to sort through it. I was also looking for earthworm eggs and didn't see any. It was late summer and they might have migrated to some wetter, more habitable places. But I looked at some other methods. One is a shocking technique where you actually stick shocking probes into the soil and you agitate them up. That was really exciting to me, but it was going to be more expensive than I had planned for. And another technique that has been shown and proven to be successful, and it sounds novel, but it works, I tried it in some other spots too, is to use dry mustard. So I actually mix a solution of dry mustard powder, which is an irritant, and mix it with water, and you treat the area you're looking at, and you just saturate the soil with that dry mustard. It doesn't hurt the worms, it just annoys them so much that they want to come up for air. You think mustard gas is an irritant. And I tried in some areas that I knew had earthworms, and those guys started coming up over the course of about 20-25 minutes. Out there, they still didn't. You know, I showed you that spade of soil, though. I saw a dozen or more earthworms just when I was giving soil samples this spring. I'll do my earthworm count in the fall again to be consistent, but I want to see that change in all different structures of life, hopefully improve as I make the soil a good place to be. So I mentioned that microorganisms are most abundant in river groups. It's where they have the most effect on the plant growth. More air. Everybody needs air. Most things need air, not everything, but most of these, especially the larger ones, do. The air is created by those root channels. They need air, they need water, they need moisture, they need space to move and get about. We also have an increased period of activity for those organisms because some of the swings in temperature are buffered by having something growing over the soil, whether it's a dead mulch or a living cover. And so you don't have as much of the high and low swings when you have those frost thaw periods over the course of the winter. So they might stay active in the soil for many weeks longer than if it was just a bare site. And then the real hot topic these days, habitat for beneficial insects. Cover crops can be an excellent way to get activity in the very, very earliest part of the spring. The crimson clover, I used some big plots of crimson clover and plan to continue because it's so beautiful. It's blooming first thing in the spring. It's very early to bloom. Also the Austrian winter pea I have up here at top. That's from our garden as well. So very early spring, you can give some forage plants for pollinators, including bees. If you choose to use warm season cover crops, an excellent one is buckwheat. That's this right here. Buckwheat has really, really good smothering potential. I'll have a little slide with some details details about it. It grows very quickly, outcompetes weeds, shades. It has a lot of leaf material, so it shades out the soil well, and it produces a very, very quick flower. So you can go from seed to maturity in about 4 to 5 weeks for buckwheat. So that means that if you have a spot where you pull up your first round of squash, or you pull up your first tomatoes, or some spring plantings, you can throw buckwheat in the ground and possibly have 2 crops before it's time for you to put in some of your cool season plants. And it's
I've seen probably one of the small flower already. It's still running.
yeah. The trouble with buckwheat is it matures very quickly, so it can become a real weed problem.
Yeah, it sells seeds.
And if you always, you'll get to recognize those seedlings very well. I've used buckwheat on a small scale too, and you can start to recognize buckwheat at a very, very early age. You can have a weed problem with it, but it's a pretty easy weed to get out of. It beats Bermuda grass any day.
Yeah, oh, yes.
A thick crop of buckwheat can drown out Bermuda grass. Take note of that. Have some borders perhaps that are having Bermuda grass coming into your garden space that you can use buckwheat. If you plant thickly, it can shade that out. But again, a lot of our legumes, clovers, peas, even buckwheat, brassicas are an excellent spring choice. The turnips and well, turnips are primarily what's used. Mustards are used because they have very early spring flowers too. So you think about the interplanting idea. This could be a great way to attract pollinators to the plants that you want more pollination on, but then also beautify your garden. So this is just a nice all around picture of what I've been trying to tell you. Have a lot of different impacts. There's not one reason to use them. So some examples. I was definitely not exhaustive in here. I could keep going and going and going, and I'll try to add more slides to this as I develop it more. But I did want to give you just a real brief look at some. There's some of the warm season legumes. Some people are not as familiar with the warm season side of cover crops, as I mentioned. But sun hemp, as I talked about earlier, is a good option for a nitrogen fixing legume. Oh, not supposed to do this. The cowpeas and even soybeans can be a cover crop as well. Also fixes nitrogen. The buckwheat we mentioned earlier. The sorghum Sudan hybrid is one that I'm using, and that's a grass. It's a hybrid grass. It's related to Johnson grass, related to sorghum, like that you extract molasses from. But it doesn't set seed, and it produces a tremendous amount of biomass. So I've got that mixed with a pea for some nitrogen fixing capacity. Millet, pearl millet, something that you see in a lot of bird seed mixes. That's another one that we're showing. That was a warm season crop. The cool season ones people are often more familiar with. Vetch, there's a few different types of vetch. Austrian winter peas, that really pretty little purple and white pea I showed you. Several different clovers. Some people will use, it's still a cover crop even though it might be a perennial white clover. They'll use that in an orchard setting or sometimes in vineyard setting, somewhere where they have a permanent cash crop, and asparagus they will use that sometimes. And it's something they can walk on, but it will outcompete a lot of other weeds and also is adding nitrogen to the soil that the cash crop can pick up. And then as well as a lot of cool season non-legumes, all these cereal grains, they all behave a little bit differently. Wheat, cereal, rye, barley, oats, and barley again. I'm not even a big fan of barley, but I've done it twice. I do want to know about rye. There's several types of rye, and it can be confusing to someone who's just getting started with cover crops. What you see a lot of in the stores is annual rye. It's a really quick to germinate cover that some people will, it's not a cover crop, technically. But it can be used for quick green up in the winter months and the cool season months. That is not the same as a cereal rye. It's a completely different plant, and it does not have all the same attributes with the allelopathic effects, and the roots are not as deep. It's not the same crop. There's also perennial rye that some people will use, especially north of here, they'll use that some in some of their cool season long mixes. They'll use a perennial rye. Not as productive here, but very different than your cereal rye. So always make note of that. Tillage radish, that's another name for the daikon radish. Also might be called forage radish. And then the turnips and mustards are also cool season. Some of these cool season crops are kind of on the borderline where you could start them in the fall and have them over winter. And then others like the oats, barley, those are probably the ones I've pushed right here. You could start those in very early spring and then plan to turn them under before it gets very warm.
You said the sorghum Sudan hybrid was related to Johnson grass. Does it make a rhizome that you have trouble getting rid of like Johnson grass?
That's a great question, but it doesn't because it's not a perennial. So the Johnson grass is a perennial, meaning that it will come back from year to year and it wants to spread and colonize, whereas the sorghum Sudan hybrid is an annual that will be frost killed and you won't deal with it again. So a lot of the basic characteristics, they overlap an awful lot. They both, non-legumes and legumes, can be used to reduce erosion. Non-legumes, especially all your grasses, will have a lot of residue, a lot of carbon, a lot of material. You think about a straw bale, that's a bale of wheat. That's a lot of material from all those stems and leaves. And that can be especially good to add some of that fluff to the soil. Your legumes, on the other hand, they're a little more spindly, they're more fleshy, they're going to break down more quickly and not add as much of that organic matter to the soil. So again, add organic, not as much on the legume side. The non-legumes can be really good for scavenging from nutrients. They have much deeper roots than a lot of your legumes do. They can pull some nutrients up into the above ground parts of the plant, which can be incorporated and more accessible to your cash crop later. In some cases, these are good and bad characteristics. They can immobilize nitrogen in a following crop. So some of you have worked in composting a lot. It takes both carbon and nitrogen to break down, or nitrogen is required to break down the carbon sources, whether it's compost pile, whether it's a blade of dead grass, whether it's in the soil or above ground. If you turn down a cover crop and then immediately turn it into the soil, a lot of that fluffy, unbroken down, recently dead material, it's a much more attractive spot for all the nitrogen to try. It's going to try to break down all that carbon, and it's going to take priority over going to your plants. If you try to put transplants into that recently tilled cover crop, your plants are going to be nitrogen starved because it will be focused on breaking down those cover crops. If that makes sense. So that can be a real issue. And sometimes you'll cause a little bit of a delay when you use cover crops. You've got to plan ahead and know that if I have a big cereal grain cover crop and I want to turn it into the soil, it might be a month before I need to put either direct seed or transplants into the ground and give it time to break into the soil. It may have allelopathic effects, good and bad. They both suppress weeds. The non-legumes are a little bit better than that because they are broader and have more leaf matter. Okay, so some of the drawbacks, more time management. I mentioned planning several times here. You've got to have a strategy for this. It's going to be continuing learning, and some are going to be harder to establish than others. Daikon's a really good example. Some cover crops in the fall, you can wait. Some farmers will wait until October to plant cover crops. Some of your grasses and maybe some of the clovers, they'll wait until later after they've gotten the cash crop. They've had a longer period to harvest their cash crop. Put the covers in when it's convenient. If you're trying to do something like a tillage radish or a daikon radish, it doesn't have long enough to get established. It's not going to overwinter. It's not going to live as long in the winter as it would if it's given it a little bit more time. The root that's so valuable to it is not going to get as big and deep, which is what you're really planting it for, if you don't let it get established. Potential to some of those that go to seed quickly, the crimson clover and buckwheat, come to mind. Some of the vetches, if you don't terminate them quickly enough, can be an issue. Some can harbor pests. There are some that will harbor different fungal pathogens. If you know you have them in the area, you'll want to study up on that. The allelopathic effects. They compete with your cash crop just like a weed could. If they're too close, if they're growing at the right, at the different depths of the soil, or if they're competing in the same layer of the soil as your cash crop, you can have some drawbacks to that. Deciding when to terminate them can be a big issue. Having the time to terminate them at the right time. It may not be convenient for you when it needs to happen. And then we'll have another topic sometime. Well, next year we'll have a no-till class and talk about that. That's a whole many-hour discussion. Right now, what we are doing in our demonstration gardens is we have one plot that we are tilling, one 10 by 10 plot, and the other 7 we're doing in a no-till form, which has some of its own issues, especially on a small scale. So just we're going to run through some of the details about some of these covers. It does not include everything by any means. Buckwheat is a great one for the warm season, so now you can be putting a crop of buckwheat out. Buckwheat's nice because you could easily have 3 crops, maybe 4 crops of buckwheat in the summer. If, maybe life or whatever has happened and you planned on gardening, you have a garden plot, you want to preserve that garden plot, but you realize you're not going to have a crop this year. So you could go ahead and cover it and be adding to the soil, even though you're not using it at the moment, and also be attracting pollinators and mining for some nutrients. So buckwheat's a great one for that. And again, it has about a 4 to 5 week window, so it can be between crops as well. It is frost sensitive, so it will not last through the winter. It is a very fast grower. If anyone wants to join me, you'll see it's one of the few that's really taking off in this dry spell. Wonderful for pollinators of all sorts, bees, wasps, flies, butterflies, all of buckwheat. Great for a smother crop. And then I also provided the seeding rates both on the acre term and also on the 100 square foot term. So it doesn't have to be a huge area. If you have a 10 by 10 area, or maybe you have 4 by 8 raised beds, you could break down that rate and just put a small amount on the bed. This is that sorghum Sudan grass. It looks an awful lot like Johnson grass because it's very, very closely related, but it doesn't have a lot of the negative features. Sorghum Sudan will grow, I've seen it grow 6, 7, 8 feet tall in good circumstances. It's really hard to manage if you suddenly decide to trim that down or mow it down. So a management strategy for a grass like this is to, about mid-season when it gets 3 or 4 feet tall, I'm going to go in there and I'll weed eat it down to about 6 inches tall and then let it regrow. So while it's not as woody, as the grass grows longer and longer, it gets woody and there's more lignin in the tissue and it gets harder to break down. I'll mow it down while it's still pretty green and fleshy, let that deteriorate quickly, and then when it's time to terminate it in the frost, it won't be as hard to manage and quite so spiky. A lot of organic matter in sorghum Sudan grass. These roots can go 5, 6 feet deep. So they're going very deep, breaking up the soil, and you're adding all that biomass and material that is growing above ground as well. This is a pearl millet, another grain that I'm growing. Haven't had great success with getting this established right now, but I'll probably reseed that soon. It's pretty if you let it go to seed, but I think it can also be a little bit of it might be a weed issue. I'm not sure if the seeds will overwinter. I had a lot of issue with geese getting into my plots, and sometimes they eat my sunflower seeds. They ate a lot of my wheat seeds when I let the wheat grow too long. I'm wondering if I would attract a lot of geese. I think I work the millet, so we actually do. This is the sun hemp I was talking about. See, this is really big. This is well over my head. It's a Crotalaria. Is the genus. Not something that you want to have in a pasture area. It does have some toxic effects to livestock, but hopefully some really good potential for cover crops. If the seed's more expensive than a lot of the others, it's harder to find. You have to go order it from home site. But I'm anxious to see how it grows this year. This is cowpea. I'm using iron clay, which is a really common cultivar that a lot of times it's used for deer, forage plots, or for hunters to beef up their deer. But there's lots of different cowpeas out there. Cowpea is a general term for things that fall into the purple hull pea and crowder pea and all sorts of field pea types. But I'm using iron clay this year. So it's going to fix nitrogen for me. I'm actually mixing it with my sorghum Sudan. And so it will grow amongst the grass until I let it get to that 3-foot height, the sorghum Sudan. When I weed eat the sorghum Sudan, I expect this to be terminated. So hopefully it will be late enough that this will already have started to fix some nitrogen and put it into the soil. But I don't think it will tolerate the cutting very low at that stage. It does kill easily. That's a pro and a con. This is winter wheat, a very common and easy to use cover crop, easy to get to. It's cheap, very, very cheap. It is best killed before the flower stems grow. So while it's still in this very leafy form and you don't have those flower spikes growing up, just the growth of those flower spikes pulls a lot of nitrogen. And it's also it's just a harder material. It's pulling a lot of nutrients to make those stronger, sturdy stems and seeds. So do what I say, not what I do. Great at preventing erosion. It germinates very quickly and has a really solid cover and prevents a lot of weed growth. This is oats. Oats is a neat one to use. It's good for if you have an area that you're going to be planting in early spring because it does winter kill. This killed actually, I believe, a week before this. This killed in early January. This is our plot out front. It can actually be an early spring mulch. All that brown material is the oat, and it's long gone now. But if I was trying to get something into the ground, maybe some whole crop transplants, broccoli, cabbage, and so on, or onions, I would plant directly into this and have a little bit of mulch for longer in the spring than I would on bare ground. This is the Austrian winter wheat. I did mix that with my wheat this last year. I found I had some loss with frost. But the areas where I mixed it with wheat in some areas, and the area where it had a lot of wheat around the individual plants, those plants were buffered and those peas didn't die. And I think they just had a little bit of strength in numbers and some buffering and didn't get as cold. But I did lose some that were just masses of the winter pea alone. They froze. This is that hairy vetch. This is where I found out that I was going to have to go in and cut it at ground level if I was going to try to seed anything underneath it. It's a lot of material. I didn't put a picture of me sitting on that, but I'm a very small spot. That big pile. And boy, it weighs a lot as you're trying to pry it up and cut more and cut more. But it produces a whole lot of, it might be an exception, it produces a lot of biomass for a legume, but it does deteriorate quickly because it itself has so much nitrogen in it. It rots pretty quickly and it's not very woody or full of cellulose. This is what that radish looks like. This is a typical daikon radish or tillage radish. I put it beside this one over here. This is an oilseed radish, which has been around a lot longer. This is used for a lot of forage plots. The deer will eat the tops, and it has been used for some soil penetrating effects. The daikon is newer like in the last few hundred years, and they're continuing to develop more strains of it because they can get really, really huge. You see some of these ginormous pictures of people holding daikons that big. That's not going to happen monthly around here. Soils are not compatible for that, but it can still have some effect on really compatible soils. It's likely to kill again at 25 degrees or so. And I've noted that you need at least 2 months of non-frost weather for it to get really established and start to form some of those big roots. I've seen some row crop areas that were using a mixture that had tillage radish in it, A mixture can be good because when it does winter kill, if you have other things that are frost hardy, you don't lose your entire cover crop, but you still create a lot of pore space. But sometimes this goes in too late, a lot around here, and it goes in, they'll put it in early October, and it just doesn't form that root before it kills. So keep that in mind when you're trying. I didn't say it can be trying to establish, it can be, that you try again. You try again, and you learn each time. I think that covers it. No, I'm sorry. It was late when I was putting this together.
You was waiting for that,
Honestly. But there is a whole lot of ongoing learning with cover crops, and I hope that some of you will investigate further. They can be great for large and small scale applications, and I'd be happy to talk with y'all about anything else. I also had some, before I let y'all go, I wanted to point out again the demonstrations, so keep tuned on that. And I also want to give you a couple of resources that are excellent and free. Yes. So this is a wonderful document produced by SARE, that's the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Group. You can see it says print version $19. The PDF is completely free. If you search for SARE, S-A-R-E, and I think if you just put cover crops, you will get to this, but the title is Managing Cover Crops Profitably. And you'll notice the right one because it has this lady with very happy.com radishes on it. You can download the file for free right here and save it. It's an excellent resource and covers in detail pros and cons of many different cover crop species, strategies, and so on.
And the topic room was really good.
The what?
The topic room invented.
Yes, well, there's a lot of really good resources on the SARE website and SARE materials.
They have another one on season extension.
Where producers sign in and discuss a lot of different topics. It's a forum. Next, this is a for-profit company, Janie Select Seeds, but their cover crop comparison chart is kind of hard to beat for a one-glance look. It's Janie Select Seeds cover crop chart, and it's a very, very tidy summary of seeding rates, pluses and minuses of each type, different attributes of different and seeding times. I know that's something that really overwhelmed me when I first started looking into cover crops, was combinations and schedule, what goes in when. A lot of us have never grown oats, amazingly enough, and we don't know when to put it in, so it's a good chart. And lastly, this is our farmers market page through the Rutherford County. This is a series of classes. It's through UT&T Extension, but we do it because we have the farmers market here as well. This is our page, and I want to show everyone in the class. There's a tab up in the middle of the page, Farmers Market, free classes. And we have our schedule here. And we also have handouts. When we have, see the cover crops is already up. We have, whenever we have a handout from the class, whether it's a cooking demonstration or some other handout, the instructor gives it to me, we post it up online so you can get it to your reference. So thank you all for coming, and I'll entertain any questions.